Hey, what's up everyone? It's That Weekend Warrior. I sat down recently with my good friend and fellow YouTuber Retro Spectrum to talk about video games and movies that we rented so much that they could have been purchased for us. Pretty sure some of you can relate. We had a lot of fun sharing stories and reliving some fond childhood memories. So sit back, relax, enjoy.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Hi. How's it going?
Good.
I remember where the camera was. There it is.
Oh yeah, it's the little light, right?
Little green light. Okay.
Little green light. Yeah. So thanks for doing this. This is my friend Brandon. He is Retro Spectrum, Retro_Spectrum YouTube. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about what you talk about on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, Retro Spectrum is a channel made by my wife and I, and we essentially like to talk about. We have videos on Disney and a lot of history that coincides with Disney, animation, theme parks, that type of thing. But the thing that most people come to my channel for are my McDonald's unbox videos, which are covertly, they are meant to look like, I'm very sneaky with my videos. They're meant to look like unboxing videos, but in fact, they're a whole history on whatever subject I will be, I'll look at the toys and then I'll discuss a history of some sort based on the subjects. And I get into all sorts of weird stuff. It's really whatever I want to talk about. And it's funny because I oftentimes pick up a lot of people along the way that are like, oh my gosh, I thought I was watching one of your videos to see you show off a toy from a Happy Meal. And I ended up learning a whole bunch. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. I kind of parody YouTube and make the kind of videos that I'd like to see.
And you're the only YouTuber I've ever seen that really kind of, you like you said, you do a larger kind of view, but like you kind of deep dive into those toys and specifically and everything. So I don't think there's anyone else that I know of out there that's doing that other than what you and Marcy are doing.
There's not many, and I hope anyone who checks out the channel, you'll learn really quickly. There's an old idea that when it comes to storytelling, that content is more important than context. And I spit in the face of that. I focused solely on context and putting everything in the context of what it was like, say, to be a kid in the 80s. And then the content comes at the end, and it's fine. It's there for the people who want to see that. But really, I focus a lot on context.
Well, it's fantastic. I thoroughly enjoy all your videos.
Thanks.
So this video was kind of an idea we had, just kind of, bouncing ideas around, I think a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's not really a very short name. It's kind of like a Fall Out Boy song title, if you will.
Yeah.
But the idea is like video games and movies I rented so much I should have just purchased, or parents purchased for us. So we started going down this rabbit hole of games that we rented and movies we rented. We tried to narrow it down and everything to be a few. And so, I mean, I hit, a couple like NES, SNES, and 64. And what were some of the titles that you were kind of touching on?
Oh gosh, I think when it comes to video games, I think it really stuck mostly to the NES. I have some surprise stuff for some other Nintendo systems, but I was a Nintendo kid up until the PlayStation came out. So once that happened, I changed video game theologies, and moved into the PlayStation world for a while. And then now I came back home to Nintendo.
Yeah, so I think by the time like the PlayStation 1 came out, I wasn't renting so much anymore. Maybe some in 64, but like that kind of was the dip for me.
Same.
I think like most, and I think you're probably going to talk about this as well, is that, a lot of people's experiences with rentals in particular, Blockbuster is, synonymous with that, right? But you had other rental places, and, and I'll go ahead and kind of start, my core memory of renting started with a grocery chain in Virginia called Farm Fresh.
Yeah.
I've been trying to track down what the name of the rental area was. It could have just been video rental. I don't remember. I've asked family. There's a Facebook group I've asked. But when you walked into the grocery store, kind of like as soon as you went through the sliding doors, it was right there in front of you. And before I talk about the game that I rented a lot at that time, one of the things I remember is when you rented it, it was the kind of transparent like cases, like the old NES, you know what I'm talking about? It's like the clamshells. It was those, right?
Yeah.
And what was really cool too is like they included the manuals.
Yeah.
Which, like when you fast forward to like Blockbuster and stuff like that, like they never did any of the manuals or anything at all.
There were manuals sometimes at Blockbuster, but it was like up until the point that someone stole it or destroyed it, and then that manual is gone. And you could be a butthole and steal it if you wanted to, but I had too much of a conscience. And same thing with rewinding. People need to know, like, you were morally obligated to rewind your tapes before you brought them back. It would really be horrible. It would be horrible, detrimental not to. But I do want to say, I think you pointed out something really important that people don't realize. If you didn't live during the 80s and the 90s and experience what movie rental was or game rental was, a lot of people solely think like Blockbuster was the only entity that rented this stuff. If you're somebody who wasn't around at the time and movies dictated, like I think interesting, we had a family video by us, which is what was featured in the most recent season of, I believe, Stranger Things. So there were Blockbusters and there was a couple other chains, but Blockbuster was really the main chain that most people knew. But people forget that, like you said, there were some in grocery stores. And they weren't big selections, but they did have some video games and movies you could get from grocery stores. I used to get games from the local drugstore we used to stop by at some point in time. And so there were smaller selections in these other. It almost became a extra revenue stream for a lot of these businesses.
Yeah, I mean, what was another one? Like Hollywood Video was another one that was out around that time, sure, and everything too. Sure. But yeah, definitely the grocery store was, I mean, for me in particular, because I mean, it was right by the house. And so anytime my mom or dad needed to go to the grocery store, you could go in and rent a game. It's funny though, is when I first started renting games, I had to almost kind of plead a case with my parents. They were fine renting VHS, no problem putting that in. My dad had the VHS cleaner kit and can clean the heads and everything. But with video games, there was so much concern of like, well, you don't know what anyone's put in there. You don't know what's going to gunk up your machine and everything, And so
and it's funny. It's funny as you and I would know at this point, because we've gotten to see some people talk about VHS tapes. It's actually, if you really think about it, there are things that could have destroyed VHS players. If you get mold inside the tapes, we've recently learned, because we got to hear some guys talk about VHS tapes. Mold can get inside those tapes and totally destroy a VHS player. And I don't know of anybody who experienced a similar type of thing with, say, an NES.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, and even to, just the other day, I had a conversation with a person and talking about like, hey, what's the best solution to kind of clean a cartridge and everything like that? Like, is it this one, like, was it Bright Boy or Bright Blue, whatever it is, or like alcohol? And it's like, is it 90% or is it 7, it's those things to clean it. But, when I was trying to plead my case, and I don't know where this came from as a kid, like it just kind of was like, well, wouldn't it be smarter just to rent it? Because if I don't like it, then we're not spending the money on it, as if I'm the one that's purchasing this item. So, with that said, I mean, I'll go and dive into like the first one that I rented a bunch. And just so you know, like everything I'm talking about right now in this video, like I still to this day don't own. Like it's on a short list of like, I do want to own these at some point. But I still to this day don't own. And the first one was RC Pro-Am for the NES.
Great game.
It's so funny, I haven't played it in years, and I watched some gameplay footage the other day, and I was like, was it a single player game? I'm like, it was. Like the second one turned into multiplayer, but the original was a single player game.
And the arcade was definitely multi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so with it, you can't choose like your car, you can't choose whatever the radio control car is. It's like as the game progresses, it changes, right? So it's like the truck, and then there's like almost like a dune buggy, whatever, as it progresses, and you got to collect different power-ups and spell the word Nintendo. But back then, like I would play this and rent it all the time because a friend in the neighborhood had it, and we'd play it, and we were essentially doing time trials, like who could get through this the quickest and everything. And I honestly, I mean, I know at least probably like 10 times, for a fact, 10 times that I asked my parent to rent it. So if you think about the cost of games back then, right, and what the rental is, and I'm just off the top of my head, like the game rental could have been like $2-3, right? 10 times, we're looking at $30. And back then, NES games, there wasn't that cap that we have now in some areas, right? But like
Right.
baseline. Most of them were like 25 to 30 bucks. So
Well,
like
and,
it
and,
paid
and we
for
didn't
itself.
we didn't buy video games in the frequency that people buy video games nowadays. You know that
Yeah.
the games you got might be your games for the. Not only did you not have the internet to warn you off of bad games,
Mhm.
you really went to the store, you looked at the package, and whichever package looked the most phenomenal, that's the game you would choose. And heaven forbid you choose the wrong thing. And oftentimes even like, you'd be a sucker for like movie games because it's a movie character, and then you play the game and be like, this is awful.
Yeah.
So the rental really was very valuable to gamers at the time because it was it had more immediate gratification because you could snag the game you wanted without purchase, because you didn't have necessarily the income to get those purchases on a regular basis. But you could really get a potpourri of different games just
Yeah.
by renting on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I think typically the rental was like what, 2-3 days, right? It was only a couple of days that you could rent it, and
It
then
was
you had to
2-3
return it.
days. I remember later in Blockbuster time period, they used to start doing something where something was new. This is more towards the VHS, but when something was new, it would be like a one-night rental, and then you'd have to have it back the next day.
Yeah.
And then the older movies you could take for a longer amount of time. That was an interesting kind of change of events, but it really was to address the fact that new movies were very hard to get, and same thing held true for games. There were certain games that were like you just snagged when they were at Blockbuster at the rental place.
Just standing beside the counter waiting for things to drop in. You're like, is it that
Yeah,
game? Is that the one? Is that it? Is that it? Hounding the sales associate. And they're like, no, bro, it's not here yet.
yeah.
So I'm gonna hand it off to you. I mean, you were saying like a lot of stuff you're doing with Nintendo. What was one of the games that you rented a lot?
So most of the stuff I'll cover is pretty much leans into one category, which is cooperative games.
Okay.
This is another little nostalgia thing for people who were raised with siblings. Parents, as much as they love, I remember the Christmas we got the video game system, so much excitement. It was a big purchase for my parents. Obviously, such a positive experience for everybody. But I don't think most parents were ready for the onslaught that was kids fighting over a controller. And so it became very much on brand for us to really focus on the cooperative games. I mean, there you could play one-on-one games too. So those were in there, but I think we leaned into a lot of the cooperative games. So number one, Contra. Obviously, that was an early rental that we rented very, very often. Contra was, the first time you ever played that game, that was a real education in difficulty when you first tried the game. And then, of course, mind blown, you find out Nintendo Power tells you there's such a thing as a Contra code. And then all of a sudden the game just opened up because you could get hours on hours of gameplay. Because otherwise, that's a game. There's an example of a game where playing cooperative actually is not great. Like, it's actually more difficult because you're both dying so often. And if one guy goes too far and this guy can't get up on the cliff, and it was a mess. So that Konami code changed it.
It's definitely one of those games that I think also required like co-op as you're playing, but co-op as like talking, like, hey, I'm gonna shoot up here while you shoot down here to kind of tackle those and everything.
Yeah.
So I mean, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Number two, I mean, I have to say, and I shouldn't have to say this on your channel, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. I always felt kind of bad getting the game because we never actually beat the original NES Ninja Turtles game, because very few people did.
You can do it now with the Cowabunga collection. You can rewind and keep going. You're good to go.
It's beautiful. Or you can let someone else just play it and then just pause the game when that player gets to a point and just be like, all right, I'll take over from here. But yeah, I mean, so we ended up renting TMNT 2 a ton. And, that was another one where it was just, we probably wouldn't rented it as much as we did because, number one, it was such a graphical downgrade from the original arcade game, and we'd already devoted so many quarters to that machine. But the thing that people have to remember about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 for the NES is that it gave you more content. The boards were longer, and then it gave you 2 new boards with 2 new villains. And I always love the fact that you had these villains that are today Like there was a polar bear, and there was a robotic samurai, and these are such obscure characters that you'd never see anymore.
Right.
It's just so fun that that they added that to the game. They added content to the original arcade game.
I completely forgot that they added those two characters to it, because I just played it through when the Cowabunga collection came out. I just played through it, the arcade one, right? And I'll just, because it has that port of it, and I was like, okay, this is great. But I haven't played the NES version of that game in a long time. I have it, played it a bunch, but I completely forgot about it.
Yeah. And then the other one, evolving from Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, and that I mean, after this, I'll get to my number one pick. But Battletoads, man, like it was such an odd title to come out. It was kind of Ninja Turtles. It was kind of Double Dragon. It was such a strange title that we were put off by it at first, so we didn't purchase the game. And then we rented, and then it was like, oh, that game was actually really hard, but really addicting because of the difficulty.
Sure.
Let's see if we can rent it again and get a little farther. Okay, let's see if we can rent it again a little farther. These games, it's incredible to me to think how many times they were rented to the point where we could have just freaking purchased the game.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So, kind of coming back to me for a second, I don't know if I would say this is my number one. I mean, a couple other on my list that I rented a bunch, like was F-Zero, like another racing game. I loved it. I played it. Still don't own it. Loved it. But one that is actually like very celebrated by many people, and I do not think it's a good game, is GoldenEye for the N64.
Very celebrated.
Oh my goodness. So I rented it a bunch only because I had a friend that he had it. And so on Friday nights, we'd hang out and we would play. By the way, in my opinion, one of the worst split screens ever. Like trying to pay attention to like even the 3 people playing and like to do the multiplayer battle is so hard. Yeah. And so I literally rented it to get better so I could have a better time playing, so I could win, and I still could never win. And I think that probably stems to like why, like, and it's crazy talking to some people in the gaming community about this, because they're shocked at like you don't like first person shooters. I'm like, no, it's not really my thing. Like, and I think a lot of that stems from my trauma of GoldenEye. I mean, there's been a few FPSs. Like I loved BioShock series, but I mean, I love the story like that. I played Skyrim. I love that stuff, right? But GoldenEye, I mean, good Lord. And what's funny is, like, we just talked about all these different games. We talked about RC Pro-Am, talked about Battletoads, and we also talked about GoldenEye. And they're all developed by Rare.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. That's
so
true.
before we started, I was like, I believe I knew Battletoads was developed by Rare, and I knew GoldenEye, but I was like, I'm pretty sure RC Pro-Am was, because there's like a series of games that Rare developed but was published through Nintendo, right? So like it's somewhere in the bylines it'll say like, like they developed it and everything like that. But yeah, RC Pro-Am, Battletoads, and GoldenEye. GoldenEye might be the one that I rented the most, and that's kind of sad for me to say that I've rented this game the most, that gave me the most grief and everything as well.
Well, and it's funny you said so many. So certainly first place, you have multiple Rare games. And then second place, Contra, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 2 Konami games.
Oh, yeah.
So you're really talking about a lot of developer. The developer we've left out so far is Capcom.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to jump into my number one, like, I could have owned this thing. I really could have just owned this game. Start by saying we were huge at the time. Everybody was a huge Disney Afternoon fan. Everybody loved Disney Afternoon. Great cartoon block. You come home, you watch Disney Afternoon. I was a huge DuckTales fan. So like, and I still am. I'm a humongous DuckTales fan. And, that game when that came out was an instant purchase. That wasn't a rental. That was an instant.
Oh yeah.
And it's a phenomenal game. It takes what I love about, like, say, Mega Man games for Capcom and it creates a new kind of twist. Just like Mega Man, it's kind of like non-linear. You can pick the boards you want to go to, and just phenomenal game. But one game that is also phenomenal that's part of the whole Disney Afternoon collection of games for the NES that we never purchased, but we sure as heck rented, was Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers. And it's a phenomenal game.
Oh, it's so good.
Again, cooperative. You could play 2 players, Chip and Dale, 2 people playing at the same time. But phenomenal game. It wasn't, I would say, it kind of had kind of a Mega Man feel, but had its own thing as well. You could pick up items, throw items, find things that are hiding when you're picking up stuff, going through things. And visually, again, Capcom was always great with like anything that was kind of mildly cartoony, bringing out that kind of the cartoon quality that we love with 8-bit graphics, with pixels, with very simple pixels. You could still get the look of these beloved characters, which I always thought was amazing. But I mean, like really, games like DuckTales, renting Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, really helped me to fall in love with Capcom as a developer, and really got me into Mega Man. Ends up being like my favorite video game character of all time. I really love Mega Man.
Really?
And Capcom's just a phenomenal. And believe me, I could go into a slew of Mega Man games that we rented way too many times as well. And they're the siren call of those games being they're really ridiculously hard to get. The first couple boards are okay, you figure out the way to go. But man, oh man, Capcom games, I would say, if we logged in like my regular rentals in terms of games, Capcom games would be the number 1 developer for sure.
At some point saw this movie somewhere on TV, and the visuals to it were stunning. It was Rankin and Bass, I believe, that did it, but it was The Last Unicorn. And I remember as a kid being completely just engrossed in the world, but also scared. Like the King by the Sea was so kind of creepy and everything like that. And then, the big, raging bull, and just it was a very beautiful and disturbing thing to me as a kid. And then I never knew what it was. And then again, same video rental place inside the grocery store, and just was looking through, and they had it on VHS, and I rented it a bunch. And I've seen that movie a ton of times, but I still, even today, I don't even own it on digital. I don't have any physical copy of it, but I rented it a bunch. And going into the next one, and it's kind of funny, is because I feel like I was having this conversation with someone recently, is that I feel like the 80s, at least like a certain portion of the 80s and maybe to the early to mid 90s, and it was like the martial arts era. You know what I mean? Like you had so much stuff coming out, right? Sure. And so, one of the first ones that I remember seeing, I think it was No Retreat, No Surrender, and it was one of the first movies that Jean-Claude did, right? So at that time, I was taking karate, and then Bloodsport came out. I was way too young to have seen this movie that's pretty much like guys beating each other. Oh my gosh, like that movie is so amazing. It's amazing, but you go and watch it now and you're just like, if I had seen this now, would I have still thought it was amazing? Like, so my wife saw it and she was like, what in the world are you watching? And so there's that song where they say Kumite over and over. So I traumatized her for a week by walking through the house singing Kumite. But that movie, again, like there were so many times that we just rented it, and I would say like over and over and over again. And I still like, I remember a time like taking martial arts and everything and trying to do the split and everything like that. And it's like, there's, but that's Jean-Claude having the dancer years and everything. But yeah, like, oh my gosh, so many times watching that movie. Did you ever see that one?
Yeah, no, well, not in a long time, and maybe just in parts. But you brought up something that's really, really important another thing we brought up, people needing to understand about rentals in the 80s, something they don't tell you when you see it in the television shows. If you weren't there, you don't know. And it's one of the number 1 rules, which is video rentals, VHS rentals, were just a poor recipe for dads and bad parenting. Like, there were so many judgment calls made by my father behind my mother's back on movies that he thought was appropriate for us to see at ages that were far inappropriate. And so, like, the number 1, like, I definitely should not have seen Die Hard when I saw it. But you know what? still, I mean, one of the greatest action movies of all time, period.
Sure.
But like all of the RoboCop movies. Hey, Dad, this would be a really good idea. Hey, wow, that does look cool just based solely on the cover. I won't look into anything else, and we'll just get it. And this brought together one of the most iconic moments of my family, which was when you remember, in church sometimes they used to have, for people don't go to church, you should know, many churches do this thing where they bring all the kids up during the middle of the church service up to the front, and they have like a little kids church for 5 minutes, and I think a lot of it has to do with just entertainment for the parents. And it was New Year's, and they were asking the kids, hey, what are your New Year's resolution? Now, Jason, you know my brother Daryl, and you've got to spend some time with him, and he's a pretty mellow dude, but he wasn't always that way. And he used to be kind of the chaotic middle child of the family. And if you know that stereotype, that's exactly what he was. And so they got around to him, and I always kind of like, even as a kid being the older brother, I would kind of sweat a little bit when they get around to talking to him. And I said to him, what's your New Year's resolution? He goes, man, I want to watch more R-rated movies. And to be very clear here, he didn't say I want to see an R-rated movie. He said I want to watch more R-rated movies. He was a very, very small child at the time. I think my mom got a little angry. My dad sunk in his seat because he knew that it was a byproduct of his decision making. And I think even one other one that I can think that he rented that probably mom would not have been too fond of had she realized it was Ace Ventura. That was another one that gets a little chaotic in parts. And you know what? God bless the man. Fathers are not always known for good decision making. So for me, like the number one picks would be like Willow. We rented a lot. I'm a fan of that movie for how cheesy it is. Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It's one of those movies I saw so much as a kid, I got kind of burned out, and I came back as an adult, and I just love that game. My brother Daryl, again, he brought up a story where like we rented Mighty Ducks, which was a frequent rental, but he brought up a story where we literally back-to-back watched the movie 3 times in a row, because as a kid, you can do that. You can literally watch the same movie over again. Something about kids' attention spans. But my number one pick, you were talking about a lot of like just the whole like martial arts obsession that was, especially the late 80s and then early 90s. People don't remember this movie, and in truth, I sometimes wonder if it was just a fever dream I had. But Surf Ninjas.
Such a great movie.
Surf
so
Ninjas.
Good.
It is one of those movies, I think it's so bad that it then turns around and becomes good because it really owns its awfulness. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, you should know it's about 2 teenage surfers from LA who turn out to be princes and have to fight the evil Colonel Chi. It's an all-star cast. Rob Schneider, Tone Lock, Leslie Nielsen, Ernie Reyes Jr., and I believe Ernie Reyes Sr. is in the movie. Ernie Reyes Jr. was hot off his portrayal, his character in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. A phenomenal movie. I just look it back. It's such an odd movie. But yeah, it's like one of those things, I don't know if you ever do this where you have this like, you almost wonder, is this like something I remember that didn't actually exist? Did I just have a dream of this? I do that a lot with Surf Ninjas. Other movies like Mr. Nanny. I don't know if you remember Mr. Nanny with Hulk Hogan. Like, it's like,
oh, wow.
Was that a real thing?
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get to my number one. And this one did not hold up. It doesn't hold up.
They've held up so well. All of them. Every single one.
So before I give the title name, I'm going to have to say that I think I saw this. We actually had HBO as a kid. And I think I saw it on HBO, and I was obsessed with it. I would rent it all the time. And my mom just thought it was disgusting. But at the same time, I think around when this came out, it's either right after this cartoon was either released right after this movie came out or right before, but it was Bobby's World, and Howie Mandel did Bobby's World and everything.
Yeah, man.
And it's the movie Little Monsters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I had to I watched some footage and everything, and prior to us chatting and everything, and then I went through and looked at a synopsis and like what'll give you a cue if like certain movies are not appropriate. Like look up like anything on Google, especially 80s movies, and there will be like a like common asked question: is this appropriate for kids?
Yeah.
And this movie, like, I mean, aside from some colorful language, like the parents like separate. Like it's not like a happy ending type scenario, but
Yeah.
aside from that, what I thought was really, really fun about this movie is like the monster under the bed was crazy and obscene, and he pulled him into this other world, and the kids went bananas, and they just had a blast. And the time rolled differently there, and it's the netherworld there. What it reminded me of is like a cross between, oh gosh, like the office space that Beetlejuice and they have to go to when they die, like to and you see like the guy that's squished sliding through. It's that type of colors and outlandishness, as well as.
It's funny you said that because that's actually when I think of Little Monsters, like I always have to like there were all these movies that kind of came out post Beetlejuice that almost had a little bit of that Beetlejuice flavor.
It was a vibe.
I personally put Little Monsters in there, Drop Dead Fred. I mean, there was just a variety of these movies that were like that almost spawned from the popularity of Beetlejuice, and I think Little Monsters is one of them.
This is one of those that, like I said, like I still don't own everything I've been talking about to this day. I still don't own it. I probably will never try to own this. Like if I happen upon the VHS somewhere and it's like $1 and everything like that, I might get it. But it's not like, hey, I'm trying to find this or seek this one out. Like I think it was on, I forget what streaming it was on at one point, and I turned it on, and I was watching a little bit of it, and I was kind of like, I really liked this as a kid. I don't think I like it so much now as an adult.
Yeah, it can be. It's either. It always seems to me that it's either hit or miss when it comes to revisiting stuff from your childhood. If I'm specifically talking about things that you've let go for a while and then are revisiting, decades later. Sometimes I turn things on. I'm like, this is amazing. Why haven't I been watching it all the time? And there's other times, like you just said, where it's just like, why did I watch this?
This was fun, man. I had a good time. Yeah. Thanks for doing this with me.
I hope I didn't steer us off into too much anecdotal stuff too often, but that's what I do. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah. This is great. So maybe we'll do more of these, and we'll combine it and call it the Retro Warrior Power Hour or something like that.
Anytime you want my help, I will be glad to talk about nonsense and nostalgia. Nonsense and nostalgia. Put it together. That's what we have.
That's
so
perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me check this out. Again, if anyone wants to check out any of my stuff, feel free to go to Retro Spectrum on retro_spectrum on YouTube and look for McDonald's Unboxed for details or any of the stuff that we do.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much, brother. Take care.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
I want to thank Retro Spectrum for joining me and sharing his stories. It was so much fun going down this rabbit hole of nostalgia with him. When you get a chance, head over to his YouTube channel where he and his wife talk about Disney history. They do unboxing for Happy Meal toys and Kids Meal toys and so much more. I'll put a link in the description. Now, question, what were some of your video games or movies that were rented so much in your childhood that you probably could have purchased? Please leave those in the comments below. As always, I'm so appreciative of everyone that watches, everyone that has subscribed, and I appreciate this channel growing. So please continue the subscriptions, share with friends and family, and also click that bell to get notified when I drop new content. Until next time, be good.